Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire and I'm honored to once again be here on the Says Stamp YouTube channel. I'm very excited about today's technique because it gives amazing results. We're going to create stamped images that have beautiful, smooth shine. Now this is a technique that you can do with any stamps, but I will be demonstrating with layering stamps because I really feel that gives the most impact. This technique can be done to create one card, but I will be creating multiples today. And the best part is you can get a second bonus card. So this is a 2-for-1 technique. So I will be showing you lots of examples today and lots of different colors. Now all of my cards feature the newest Says Stamp STAMPtember collab stamp set. This is with kitchen sink stamps. Kitchen Sink Stamps has amazing layering stamp sets. I've used their products before in videos. I've always been a fan. If you've never seen their products, be sure to check them out. I'll link them below in my description. They do such detailed layering stamps that are easy to figure out because of a number coding they have. And because this is a STAMPtember collab, once it's gone for good. But I will link below to some other similar stamp sets if you're looking for something after it's sold out. But you could do this technique with really any stamps or layering stamps. Before I get started on the technique, I just wanted to stamp these out with normal ink colors on white cardstock, just so you could see the realistic look you can get with them. The technique that I'm doing gives a unique look, so I just wanted to show you the basic first. So it's very easy to figure out how to layer these because there's a guide that comes with this stamp set. I'm just using some inks I had on my desk. Sorry my head gets in the way, but that's the easiest way to kind of line up the images is to look directly from above. So here's what the butterfly looks like when stamped with normal colors. So realistic, such beautiful results, and very easy. In this video, I will also be using the layering flower that's included in the stamp set. Keep in mind the stamp set also has a dragonfly, but I didn't use that today. Now, when you're doing stamp layering like this, I encourage you to mix up different brands of inks and different colors. You'd be amazed how forgiving layering stamps can be in the end, even if you don't have just the right colors to layer together. Use whatever you have. All right, so here's a look at what that flower looks like. Such beautiful detail to it and so realistic looking. And keep in mind, there are multiple layers to these images. You can always skip one to save time if you want to, and you'll still get great results. Okay, so here's a look at the layering butterfly and layering flower I'll be using today in fun colors. My technique will be a little bit different, but I wanted to just show you this basic first. I'm starting out by cutting a bunch of pieces of bold cardstock to be 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I also have my MISTI stamping tool, and I'm going to use this tool because it will be very helpful in making multiple cards, but you could definitely use an acrylic block if you prefer. So I'm putting in a piece of my bold cardstock, and I'm stamping the first layer of the butterfly, the most solid one, and the first layer of the flowers, the most solid one. And I'm stamping that with pigment ink, white pigment ink. This is Says Stamp white pigment ink. Any great white pigment ink will work. And I am double stamping it just to get more ink onto my cardstock. Then I will move on to my next piece. I chose bold colors of cardstock today because I feel like this technique is more impactful on bold or darker colors of cardstock, but you could do lighter colors if you want to. You'll see a variety at the end of this video, so you can get an idea of what you can get on different shades of cardstock. So I have like 8 different pieces of cardstock here, different colors to play around with, but you definitely could do this technique making one card at a time if you prefer. After I've stamped these 2 images onto all of these pieces of cardstock, I'm going to add some pigment powder. I'm using Ranger's Perfect Pearl pigment powder in the original Perfect Pearl color. A little goes a long way with this product. I have used it many times in videos over many years. It's a tried and true product that has a great price point, and again, a little goes a long way. So many ways you can use it. Here I am pouncing the pigment powder onto my wet ink. That white pigment ink will stay wet for a while, so it'll grab a hold of that pigment powder and hold it there. And I'm going to do this to all the pieces of cardstock right now. The reason I'm stopping here to put the pigment powder on before moving on to more stamping is I want this ink to be very wet when I apply the pigment powder so that it stays put. Now there are many pigment powders out there. I like the Ranger Perfect Pearl because it has a built-in fixative, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I also really like the shine. Now they sell individual jars of the pigment powder, or you can buy a pack. I'm using the brush that they have for Perfect Pearls, but you could use whatever brush you may have. I like to pounce the powder onto the wet ink, then brush the excess off onto scrap paper by going back and forth with the brush. And then I take a dry cloth to gently buff away any of the excess powder. And then the powder will only be where we stamp those images with the white pigment ink. If you don't have white pigment ink, you could also do this step with Versamark ink and then add that Perfect Pearl powder. So after I did that to all of those images, you can see that shine that it has. Absolutely gorgeous. You could skip adding the shine if you don't have it and just have a white image, but the shine really steps this technique up. Okay, let's do some more stamping. I'm back to my stamping tool and I'm taking those same two images. The first layer of the butterfly and flowers, and the first layer is usually that layer that's the most solid. And I'm again stamping those with white pigment ink, double stamping because my ink pad's getting a little dry and I want to get a lot of ink down. Just to save some time in the video, I will do this stamping off screen, but I did double stamp the butterfly and floral image on every piece of colored cardstock. Now it's time to go back and do some more of the pigment powder. So I'm pouncing my Perfect Pearl on there using my brush, brushing away the excess, and then wiping away the excess with a dry cloth. Now I'm doing all this on a piece of scrap paper, that white piece there, so that I'm able to funnel that powder back into the jar. You'd be amazed really how little you need to add this powder to each of these projects. Now you could have gone through and stamped all of your butterflies and flowers with white pigment ink, then added the powder on in the end. However, parts of that white pigment ink might dry, so it won't grab a hold of much of that powder and you won't get as shiny of results. So I like to stamp a pair of images, then add the powder. Then stamp a set of images and add the powder. And just do that until all of the background is stamped with the powder on all of the images. It really doesn't take long. It's definitely worth the effort, and we'll have a bunch of cards in the end. So fast forwarding, here are our backgrounds. I use those same two images to stamp repeatedly over the background, adding the Perfect Pearl pigment powder to all of them. It's hard to capture the shine, but it is really intense in real life. You can see on the lighter color backgrounds like this one, it's a little more subtle, but on the darker ones, that shine really stands out. So this is the original Perfect Pearl color. It almost looks white, like a pearl on your cardstock, and it kind of picks up whatever color's behind it. There are many colors of Perfect Pearls out there. Some have like this holographic look to it. Some change color as you tilt it in the light. Some are gold. There are lots of options, all very inexpensive, but this is the one that I reach for the most because it can be used with any colors of cardstock. So here I'm just wiping away any of the excess powder from the front and the back of my panels, and it's time to go to the next layer of stamping. So I'm just following the guide that comes with the stamp set. It's very easy to do. It gives little notes on what parts you need to match up, like the tip of the butterfly wings or the tip of the flower. So I'm putting in my first piece of cardstock, and I have that second layer of the butterfly and the second layer of the flower image. This time I will be stamping with a dye ink on top, and I'll talk in a bit about what type of inks work for this. So this stamping will go right on top of that Perfect Pearl we put on the white pigment ink. All right, so I will ink up my stamp and then stamp it on to the images we already have. Then this is the fun part. Take another piece of cardstock. I just used white cardstock of the same size, and without re-inking your stamp, you're going to stamp all the extra ink that's on the stamp onto the white cardstock. This is called second generation stamping. It'll be a lighter image, but instead of making that ink go to waste by wiping it off with a dry cloth, you're getting that second generation. And then I'm going to repeat the process. Ink up the stamps again, stamp it onto your perfect pearl images, remove that piece, and again stamp the second generation onto your white cardstock piece. This will make it a bit darker. And look at, you have the second panel going just by using the extra ink. So let's do that again. I'm going to wipe my stamp clean, ink up my stamp with a blue ink here, stamp it onto my perfect pearl images. Then without cleaning or re-inking the stamp, I'll stamp it off, second generation, onto a white cardstock piece of the same size. Now before we repeat the process, I do like to wipe my stamp clean with a dry cloth, just so I don't get any perfect pearl pigment powder onto my ink pad. All right, so let's ink up the images, stamp them onto the first panel again, just to make that darker. Then take this out of the stamping tool, put in my white cardstock piece without re-inking, stamp the extra ink off onto the white cardstock, and we have a second panel building up. So we're doing a 2-for-1 technique. Now let's talk a little bit more about this stamping. I am choosing to use a dye ink that is the same color as my cardstock or slightly darker. You could change it up if you want to and do a completely different color. It'll give great results. I'll show that in a moment here. Now the reason I am stamping twice is I just want to make that image more intense on top of the perfect pearl pigment powder that we used, and it also makes my second generation more intense. I'm using dye ink because I feel it works best in this situation. You could use distress ink. You could use pigment ink. It won't work as well, especially for the second generation, but you can definitely try whatever you have. In this case, I'm using Says Stamp Pawsitively Saturated ink because it comes in so many great colors that go nicely with the background cardstock that I chose to use. I will say that the dye ink will stay wet for a while on top of the perfect pearl because it's not getting a chance to really absorb into the cardstock because that perfect pearl is behind it. However, if you just set it aside, it will dry pretty quickly, or you can heat set it to dry it very fast. Just don't touch it right away or it might smear. So I will continue to do this process, moving those second layers of the butterfly and the floral images to new spots, and again, making sure to make use of that second generation on my white backgrounds. So here you can see I'm going to keep filling up this white background also. As I keep stamping here, I just wanted to mention something I learned as I was doing these backgrounds. I found the most impressive backgrounds were ones that had a dark cardstock to begin with, and then I used a darker dye ink to stamp on top of the perfect pearl pigment powder. I just felt that the results were more intense, but you can use softer ink and a softer background if you want a softer, more subtle looking background. So it's definitely something that's fun to experiment with. And because I'm doing so many backgrounds at once, I can learn which options I like better, and I can remember that for the next time I do this technique. So I will continue to move the images around, stamping with that matching color of ink and stamping the second generation onto white cardstock. This will double the amount of backgrounds that I get. So off screen, I continue to do the stamping until our whole background has the 2 layers of the butterflies and the flowers, and the entire white cardstock is covered with images. Now it's time for the 3rd layer of the butterfly and the 3rd layer of the flowers. I will be using the same color of ink that I used for the 2nd layer, but a darker shade. So this is darker than the last dye ink color that we used. Again, I like to try to match the color of cardstock, just go darker. And once again, I will ink up the stamp, stamp it on my colored background. Then without cleaning the stamp or re-inking, I'll stamp that second generation onto the white. Then I clean my stamp and repeat the process. Stamp on my colored background. Without cleaning the stamp, stamp that second generation onto the white, and then we can clean our stamp. And look at how we're building up these images. It's beautiful. Layering stamps, man, I tell you, the farther you go along in the layering, the better it looks. It's definitely something that is worth trying if you've never tried a layering stamp before. So I'm going to continue this process. Stamp on the colored background. Without re-inking, stamp on the white background. Then go clean your stamp because you don't want to get that perfect pearl pigment powder on your ink pad, and repeat the process. You could do only one image if you want to, but it will be more intense on the first and second generation stamping if you repeat the process. After I covered the entire background with that last layering of stamping, it's time to add the stems to the flowers. Now, I think you could totally skip this step if you wanted to, but what I decided to do was only use one layer of the stem, the first layer, line it up and just stamp it with the matching ink color to the background. I'm not doing the white pigment ink with the perfect pearl for this. I'm just stamping that color directly onto the cardstock. And for our second generation panel, I just stamped directly onto this too. So it'll be darker, but it'll help it to stand out more. So let's do that again. I'm just stamping with my dye ink that first layer of the stems on both the colored panels and the white panel. So again, I'm skipping one of the layers of the stem just to save some time. And I just wanted to let you know that that's okay to do. You don't have to do all of the layers in a layering stamp set in most cases, especially if it's a floral image or a butterfly, something like that, you can skip a layer. So I continue to do that on all of the backgrounds. And now let's look at all of our background pairs that we have. I love that this results in 2 backgrounds for one technique. I so wish my camera would capture the shine of these images because of that base layer that we did with the white pigment ink and perfect pearl pigment powder. It is a glowing pearly shine that is just beautiful. Now let's take note of this black background here. So this is black cardstock, and I stamped on top of the white layer with a blue ink. So your ink doesn't have to match your background if you don't want it to. So you could use like a blue background and maybe do like a purple ink on top. I think this black with the blue is definitely my favorite of the backgrounds. It'd be fun to do each butterfly a different color or the flowers a different color. So this is one of the things that I like about doing multiple backgrounds at once is you learn things as you go. Now here's a lighter option. You can see lighter cardstock, lighter ink color, so it's a more subtle look. In the end, what I learned is that I like the darker color backgrounds with darker inks, and I next time would do more mixing and matching of colors of backgrounds and ink colors. So I would do maybe a pink background with a blue stamping on top of the butterflies. These are the things you learn as you create. Okay, so now I have all of these backgrounds. It's time to make some cards, and I kept them pretty simple from here on. I did trim all of my panels down to be 4 by 5¼ inches, so they'd be slightly smaller than my note card. For a sentiment on most of them, I used a new die set from Says Stamp and CZ Design. This is actually a die set that I requested that Kathy make because I love her style of dies so much, and this hello is just perfect. So after I bought and got this die set, I decided to go ahead and die cut a bunch so they'd be ready to go because I knew I'd use it a lot. So now I can just take those pre-die cut pieces, assemble them, and add them to my card very quickly. I die cut the word hello from black and the shadow from white. I also thought it'd be good to have a little sentiment strip to go underneath the hello. I chose the Says Stamp CZ Design Clean Line XL stamp set. I'm lining up one of the narrow sentiments onto the top of a piece of white cardstock, and then I'll stamp that with black ink. After I stamp it on the top edge, I will shift my cardstock up and stamp again, and do this several times. This will give me many of the same stamped image, which I can then cut into strips. Now I'm making the same sentiment on all of my cards because I need a bunch with this particular theme. However, you could save your butterfly backgrounds and add whatever sentiment you want when a particular occasion pops up. Those butterflies would be great for sympathy, birthday, thinking of you, absolutely any occasion. Again, I just needed a bunch of hello cards, so that's what I went with. So here I'm trimming down the sides of my sentiment, and now I can just cut between the sentiments to get even little sentiment strips with the sentiment already stamped. I also am cutting thin pieces of white cardstock from the scrap that I can glue behind our stamp sentiment for a bit of dimension. By the way, another option for these sentiments would be to stamp them and then use a sentiment strip die to cut them each out. To glue my layers and pieces together, I'm using Gina K Connect liquid adhesive in the Precision Glue Press. This liquid adhesive gives me a little bit of wiggle time as I place things down and get them straight, and it'll dry nice and strong so I can be sure it'll hold up when going through the mail. So I've added my hello sentiment and then the sentiment strip below it. So let's look at these completed cards. I did pretty much the same design on all of them. I trimmed those backgrounds down and add them to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. I added the sentiments and then also some silver glitter gemstones just for a bit more sparkle. I hope you can see here in the light how much shine we get on those images. It is just beautiful and eye-catching in real life. And as I mentioned, my favorite of the bunch is the black with the perfect pearls on it and then the blue ink on top of that. Next time I'll do a rainbow of colors on top of the perfect pearls, and I think the result would be really fun. Now, I do think it's important to mention the fact that you're supposed to do something to set the perfect pearls. Now, the Perfect Pearl Pigment Powder has a built-in binder. When it comes in contact with the ink, it should stay there good enough. So I didn't do anything to this. When I rub my finger against it, I don't find that any is removing. However, if you want to make sure that it stays put, there are two things that you can do. One is you can do like a mist of water in the air and just wave the background through it. And that bit of moisture will help to make the perfect pearls set. The other option is to spray a fixative on it. Now, I didn't find it necessary to do either of these things, but if you want to be safe, you can use a clear fixative. And I would definitely use a clear fixative if I was using a different brand of pigment powders. However, with the Ranger, I don't think it's necessary. Now, on one of my cards, I did decide to change up the sentiment because I had it sitting there and I wanted to put it to good use. This is the Says Stamp Retro Wishes stamp set. I really like the sentiments in here. And there is a coordinating die set that will cut those sentiments out. So on this blue one, I silver heat emboss Thinking of You on white cardstock and used that coordinating die. I had actually had that piece left over from a different project. It was sitting on my desk and I thought I would add it to this card. Just showing you that you really could add any sentiment on here, either stamped or die cut, and the background will work with any themed card. Okay, next I still have all those second generation stamping panels, the ones on white cardstock. So let's turn those into cards. Now, if you remember correctly, I didn't do the first layer of the butterfly or the first layer of the flowers on these. You could go back and add those with a light color of ink, but I thought I would leave it as is. So this shows you can skip layers. I skipped the first layer and it still looks pretty cool. Now I did want to really pull the background together though, and you could do ink blending over the background to kind of pull it together and have less contrast between the white background and the bold ink, but I decided instead to stamp on top of it. So I have a text background stamp from Says Stamp, and I'm stamping that with a light color of ink over the entire background. I just feel this pulls it all together nicely, gives less of that contrast between the white and dark color inks, and just makes for a better background. So again, if you want to, you could do the first layer stamping of the butterfly and flowers in a soft color, but I thought it would be fun to stamp with that text background and a light ink color instead. And I will do the same thing on all of my second generation panels, just using a light color of whatever ink color I used for the butterflies and flowers. Now from these backgrounds, I'm creating two different card designs. The first one is one of my go-to designs where I cut an angled background. So using my trimmer, I'm just cutting a random angle, just eyeballing it here towards the top of my panel. The little piece I cut off the top, I can save for another project. I'm just using the bigger one today. I'm doing this design with two of my panels, the one that has peach and the one that has pink. I'll glue those to the bottom of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folded white note card. And then right above that angled edge, I will put a line of glue and then a scrap of colored cardstock that matches my stamping. Another option would be to use a scrap of white cardstock and color that cardstock with the same color of ink that you used on your background. I then will do another line of liquid adhesive and then lay a thin strip of silver matte cardstock on top. I save all these little thin strips, and nothing goes in my trash without me cutting off these strips first, because they're great accents and borders on cards such as this one. After trimming off those scraps, I stamped "Sending So Much Thanks" from that Retro Wishes stamp set with black ink on the top left corner. And then I also added more of those silver glitter gemstones to the background. So you can see how I was able to use my second generation stamping from the other technique to create these bonus backgrounds, and they look beautiful. And remember, I skipped the first layer and it still looks cool. So definitely try experimenting with skipping different layers of stamp layering sets to get different looks. For the rest of my second generation panels, I'm doing a split background design. You can see how half of the background is blue and half is the aqua. To do this, I'm holding my blue and aqua panels together, and then I'll cut them in half right down the center using my trimmer. That will give me 4 pieces, and I can swap them so that I'll have 2 backgrounds. One that is half blue and half aqua, and the other that's half aqua and half blue. This is just a fun way to kind of change up the design, have something a little more interesting. Now I will glue these panels onto a note card, but I want some added dimension behind them. So I cut some scraps of cardstock to glue behind them. These are cut to be slightly smaller than our little stamped panels. I'm gluing 3 of these pieces together, and then I'll glue it on the back of our stamped panel. You could definitely use foam tape here, but this is more cost-effective and it'll hold up much better in the mail. These are scraps of inexpensive white cardstock. You could really use anything, maybe a panel that you stamped on and maybe messed up, or really you could use recycled packaging too. Some people even use pieces of cereal box to build up this dimension. But this will just help these stamp panels to stand out against the white note card that I'm adding them to. So I'll glue those panels onto the card, having different colors on the left and the right side and a little gap between them. I once again used that Simon Says Stamp CZ Design Scripty Hello die set, but this time I did black for the base for the shadow and white for the word hello. I did add those silver glitter gemstones to the background because they match just about any background, and it made it easier when I was pulling all the cards together. Notice that even though we're using 2 different panels, the peach and the pink here, the pattern still lines up across the whole card because we used a stamp positioner to stamp in the same place on all of our panels. So you have that continuous look to it, which I think really adds to the fun of the card design. Oh, and by the way, I had 1 leftover background, so I just trimmed this one down, added it to a white note card, and added the sentiment. So you can keep these cards very simple since there's so much interest in the background. And in the end, I have a bunch of cards made. We have half of them with the bold backgrounds and the shiny stamping, and then half that are the second generation. This is a fun technique. Again, you could just do 1 pair of cards if you want to, but I like to make a bunch of cards at once. I really hope you'll give this technique a try. It's a fun one, and I appreciate you watching.
I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at SimonsSaysStamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.